And no matter how much rage you have or anger you have, when you're by yourself and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you haven't been asleep yet and there's nobody coming to save you and your wife's laying next to you and your 2.5-year-old son's in the next room and she's pregnant, there's a lot of questions you're going to ask yourself.
Yeah, that's intense. You had mentioned, you said, the more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. That's a paradox most people in high performance don't want to hear, because what you're describing isn't a metaphor. It's a very specific kind of experience. And I want to understand what it actually felt like from the inside. What does that actually mean in practice? Not philosophically, but concretely. The more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. Because here's what I'm sitting with as I hear you say that. Sacrifice usually implies loss, something
Correct.
given up, something that doesn't come back. But what you seem to be pointing at is almost the opposite. The act of letting something go created room for something truer to emerge. So I want to ask you directly, what is the first thing that you sacrificed that you actually grieved, not released cleanly, but grieved? Because I think that's where the real answer to the question lives.
Yeah. And so I didn't, first of all, thank you for bringing that up. It's one of my favorite topics to dig into, and it is paradoxical. And I do want to expand on that paradox. Someone was talking to me recently, and they used the phrase that happiness is sold separately. And I smiled when they said that. And of course, I was asked, why are you smiling? And I said, because you made me think of something about myself. And when you said happiness sold separately, it made me think of the following statement, which is if you pursue happiness, you'll never find it, right? Okay, Scott, well, if I pursue happiness and I can never find it, then where will I find happiness? It's in the place you refuse to look, all right? And sit with that for a while because it goes back, ties into, said differently, but it ties into the more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. So how does that manifest itself, not philosophically, but as you asked, in the real world? Well, I'm going to give you again, I'm only going to give personal examples. I don't want to give third party examples.
Mm-hmm.
The way it manifests in my life, I'm going to jump to training for an Ironman race. Okay. In the early days, my first Ironman race, 140.6 miles, in my first Ironman race, in the very beginning, I never told anybody, including my family, that I had already paid the money and picked my Ironman and I was going to do the race in a year. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but I chose not to say anything. And as I started working out 6 days a week, some days twice a day, this thought kept recurring to me. And it wasn't the one that you and I are talking about. The thought kept recurring to me was, Scott, what are you willing to sacrifice? Over and over, the question permeated my brain. What are you willing to sacrifice? And I would give it a lot of answers when I'm running and I'm working out. Oh, I'm going to sacrifice. I'm not watching football games, and I'm not going to watch any TV on weekends, and I'm going to eat better. And I had this long list of things that I would offer up to the altar, right? That I'm going to sacrifice. And the voice kept saying, no, not what I'm looking for. What are you going to sacrifice, Scott? So to fast forward for the listeners, the answer I came up with is, oh, I know what you're looking for. I'm going to sacrifice myself. Well, what does that look like? Well, what that looks like is that I'm going to bend the knee to the things that I have to do to allow me to do an Ironman, which means I'm going to have to, it's not about material things. I'm going to have to sacrifice my body. I'm going to have to sacrifice sleep. I'm going to have to sacrifice pain. I'm going to have to sacrifice discomfort. I'm going to have to run in the rain, run in the cold. If I'm bleeding, I'm going to have to run in the bleed. That's what I'm going to have to do. That's what I'm willing to do in order to cross the Ironman finish line. Okay. Now, going through that was really the ultimate evolution of me learning over time and effort and running in the dark and running at night, running in the cold, running in the heat, just all these different events. It was really during my Ironman training where I settled on the phrase, I see now, the more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. That's
Amazing. I
where it
love it.
came from.
I've got to ask you though, I want you to continue, but I want to bring in, I can identify with what made you not want to tell your family and you started training and doing it without telling? What was that about?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's actually,
I like
yeah,
that. That would be something I would do. I'm just,
yeah. No, it's actually an important question. Okay. It's an important question. Now, I'm going to limit this to my family, but the answer is broader than that. The first thing is, and there were a series of reasons, but the very first reason that I didn't tell them is because I'd already kind of semi-answered the question, what you're willing to sacrifice, right? And I said to myself, I will not sacrifice my family and my relationship. So I did, that was the one thing that I said, I will not sacrifice my family and my relationship. And I knew that when I said I was going to do an Ironman, they were going to think I was crazy, that unattainable. You've lost your mind. And I didn't want to hear it, because when I say I made up my mind, I will be doing an Ironman race, that was the end of the discussion. There was no debate. There will be this is a cut your leg off into story. So I didn't want to hear it. That was number one. Now, let me give you a couple of subtitles. I wanted to prove to myself in the early days that this wasn't some stupid game mental game I was playing with myself. And I just wanted to know, Scott, are you going to stay disciplined on this? Here's a word that I use around my family is broken promises. You've got a lot of broken promises in your life, Scott. Things that you said you're going to do that you never did. You talked a great game, brother. Didn't do it. So they're broken promises. So what are you going to do? I always wanted to do an Ironman. Okay. Since they first came out, we saw them on television when we were kids. Thought about it all the time. But now it's different. Now I'm going to do it. So I wanted to know for at least days and weeks that I wasn't going to break the promises. You know what I mean? So that was an inward looking thing, not an outward, right? So I don't want to take up the whole podcast telling you, but those were the two big ones. Is I wanted to know I wasn't going to break my promise to myself, and I didn't want to tell my family. And then one night, on a Friday night, I'll never forget, sitting at the dinner table. I was nervous as a cat, sitting there eating. It was quiet. My daughter, my son, my wife were there, you know. And then they always did this. They would ask me questions. Why are you working out so much?
Love that.
What's going on? Are you okay? Are you mad?
They sense something?
Oh, of course they did.
Yeah. And you would.
The temperature changed in the room, Nick. And then they would say, hey, Dad, it's Saturday. Can we go play golf on Saturday? You know what? We can, but I got to get my bike in first. What? You're working out 6 days a week. What do you mean? You just went to the gym this morning at 5 o'clock and had a strength workout, and you're going to the pool after work to swim 2,000 yards? What?
Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? A loss, a new path, or an awakening that forced you to rewrite your life? Pivot Point is a podcast that explores those stories. I'm Nick Michael. We'll dive into how pain can spark growth and how crisis leads to clarity. Subscribe to Pivot Point today. Welcome to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. I'm Nick Michael. There's a particular kind of success that quietly turns on you. Not the kind that collapses in one dramatic moment, but the kind that builds steadily, looks exactly right from the outside, and then one day, without warning, stops making any sense at all. The business is real. The family is there. The thing you invented, the vision you carried, it's actually happening, and still, something underneath all of it feels like it no longer fits. Most people push through that feeling. They optimize. They pivot externally. They find the next goal. My guest today did something much harder. He stopped. He looked directly at what he had been avoiding, and what he found wasn't circumstance or bad timing or someone else's decision. What he found was himself. My guest today is Scott Lackey. Scott is an author, speaker, and chief strategy officer who has built companies, crossed Ironman finishes, served in war, and lost things that looked from the outside like everything. His upcoming book, Wake Up to Die Again, carries a title that tells you exactly where this conversation is going. Because the pivot Scott is talking about isn't strategic. It isn't a rebrand or a career change. It is a complete confrontation with the identity that got built along the way and the painful, liberating process of letting it go. What draws me to Scott's story is something he said in his own words, and I want you to hold on to it as we go. You don't have to go anywhere to find what you're looking for. It's exactly where you are standing, or perhaps where you've been hiding. That's not a metaphor. For Scott, it was a reckoning. This is a conversation about what happens when achievement stops being enough, when the version of yourself you build for the world no longer holds, and when you finally have the courage to ask not what you need to do next, but who you are becoming in the process. Scott, welcome to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. As you know, I'm very excited to have you and to have this conversation with you.
Well, the feeling is mutual. Nick, thank you for having me as a guest. And I look forward into digging into a few things that we've already wrestled with and share that with the audience. And my greatest hope is that at the end of this, more than one will come away with it with something actionable that will make a difference in their life. So thank you for the platform, sir.
I appreciate it, and I know it certainly will. I want to start off. You use the phrase lightning strike moments, not one singular pivot, but a series of them. What made those moments different from ordinary stress or difficulty? What was it that made them strikes?
Right. So a lightning strike, by my definition, and I will say for the listener, they're not just negative, right? They're not just positive, but they are absolutely not neutral. Okay. A lightning strike moment is when an event of significance happens such that who you become in that millisecond can no longer return to who you were just a moment ago, right? And an easy way to exemplify that is simple. Scott, you're fired. In that very moment, who I am and how I feel versus where I was, I can't get back to that. Or perhaps you want to go a little bit harder and you're in the hospital room and someone passes away. There's something that changes within us that we can never get back to. That's what I'm calling a lightning strike moment. And again, I'm using significant events there that are negative, right? I've had lightning strikes in my life where extraordinary events happened that were wonderful and beautiful. And it changed me who I was from that moment to something I could never retrench or retrace to go back to who I was before.
What was it like for you then? Your book is coming out. You have a range of emotions that are going on at the same time. At the height of what looked like your most significant external achievement, family invention, funding, what were the first quiet internal signals that something was misaligned for you?
I think one of the things you and I talked about was my second invention that was actually patented and was funded by a private equity company. A business plan, I should say, was funded for $3 million. I think that's one of the things that we talked about. I shared that the extraordinary story behind how that thought came to me and how that rolled out over many years before we actually put money, if you will, our personality, our lives, our investment into it. My wife and I put everything we had into that. But the pivot point or the lightning strike in that was twofold. It was the day that I called the bank and asked how much money's in the account. And they told me the wire transfer hit. And I will never forget setting the phone down and just staring at the phone thinking, oh my God, I did it. I did it. This is the made for TV movie of a young man who has done all these things. And now I've arrived with my family and we invented a product called a childhood health passport. And it was magic. It's really hard to describe what that feels like. And I will say this, I know what it feels to win the lottery. And that was a lightning strike where it's one thing to think you're something. It's another to know it when the wire transfer hits and the contract's been signed. There's a large gap between thinking it and hearing the bank balance. Okay. So using that lightning strike example, in that moment, when I hung up the phone, I was a different person than I was before I picked up the phone and made the phone call. Not physically, but those intangible things that exist inside all of us. I'm going to fast forward from that moment to almost 6 months to the day where I'm sitting in a boardroom on a speakerphone talking to the investment group who proceeded to share their demands before another investment was made that we're going to turn right, figuratively speaking. And as the president of the company, I said, we're not turning right. I invented this. The management team is running this. We're moving forward. And almost 6 months to the day, the difference between power and control, I had the power. The private equity firm had the control. We were fired and they took possession of the company and all those personal guarantees I had and all that investment, everything that I'd ever worked for was eviscerated in a nanosecond. Eviscerated financially, soul wrenching, life changing. I could never return to the person I was just before hearing the words, "You're fired." So that's two personal lightning strikes that happened many years ago, but I'm giving you the left bookend and the right bookend to the story.
So when you were removed from what you built, I want to ask you something that goes underneath the loss itself, because losing something you created is one thing, but I'm wondering whether in that moment, the loss felt like more than just losing the company, whether it felt like evidence of something like a verdict that some part of you had always been afraid was coming, Was there a fear that got confirmed in that moment that had been living underneath the ambition the whole time?
Yeah, there was. And one of them was that the entire relationship with the investment firm, it never ever felt like we were in alignment. What it felt like is that we were running a parallel course and we were just close enough that both parties believed that what they were saying were going to the same destination, but they weren't. Alignment is required to get to the same destination. Going parallel to each other does not mean that you're going to end up at the same place. And my destination was straight off of a cliff, right? Theirs was to continue on. My railroad tracks ran out. So that wasn't that actually was happening before the investment took place with the lawyers and, the accountants and just all of those activities that we just, it was always just a little off. But we all shook our heads and shook hands, and I'm sure they felt the same way. But yes, the answer to that is yes, is that that's how it felt leading up to the entire relationship we had during, the execution of the business plan. So that's the relationship with them. But when I look at myself, and of course, after the event happens, there is nothing that goes unquestioned when you are the receiver of that verdict. Nothing. Your character, okay? The very thing that you had faith in, the very thing you believed in and gave birth to, everything is questioned and the fingers get pointed. And no matter how much rage you have or anger you have, when you're by yourself and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you haven't been asleep yet and there's nobody coming to save you and your wife's laying next to you and your 2.5-year-old son's in the next room and she's pregnant, there's a lot of questions you're going to ask yourself.
Yeah, that's intense. I remember you had mentioned, you said, the more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. That's a paradox most people in high performance don't want to hear. I haven't been able to shake that line since I heard it, and I want to come back to it because I think it's doing more work than it might appear to on the surface. It sounds almost like a spiritual aphorism, the kind of thing that looks clean on a page but then gets complicated the moment you try to live inside of it. Because what you're describing isn't a metaphor, it's a very specific kind of experience. And I want to understand what it actually felt like from the inside. What does that actually mean in practice? Not philosophically, but concretely. The more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. Because here's what I'm sitting with as I hear you say that. Sacrifice usually implies loss, something
Correct.
given up, something that doesn't come back. But what you seem to be pointing at is almost the opposite. The act of letting something go created room for something truer to emerge. So I want to ask you directly, what is the first thing that you sacrificed that you actually grieved, not released cleanly, but grieved? Because I think that's where the real answer to the question lives.
Yeah. And so first of all, thank you for bringing that up. It's one of my favorite topics to dig into, and it is paradoxical. And I do want to expand on that paradox by making a different comment to run parallel to this. I'm going to answer your question. And there is someone was talking to me recently and they used the phrase that happiness is sold separately. And I smiled when they said that. And of course, I was asked, why are you smiling? And I said, because you made me think of something about myself. And when you said happiness sold separately, it made me think of the following statement, which is if you pursue happiness, you'll never find it, right? Okay, Scott, well, if I pursue happiness and I can never find it, then where will I find happiness? It's in the place you refuse to look, all right? And sit with that for a while because it goes back, ties into, said differently, but it ties into the more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. So how does that manifest itself, not philosophically, but as you asked, in the real world? Well, I'm going to give you again, I'm only going to give personal examples. I don't want to give third-party examples.
Mm-hmm.
The way it manifests in my life, I'm going to jump to training for an Ironman race, okay? In the early days, my first Ironman race, 140.6 miles, in my first Ironman race, in the very beginning, I never told anybody, including my family, that I had already paid the money and picked my Ironman and I was going to do the race in a year. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but I chose not to say anything. And as I started working out 6 days a week, some days twice a day, this thought kept recurring to me. And it wasn't the one that you and I are talking about. The thought kept recurring to me was, Scott, what are you willing to sacrifice? Over and over, the question permeated my brain. What are you willing to sacrifice? And I would give it a lot of answers when I'm running and I'm working out. Oh, I'm going to sacrifice. I'm not watching football games. And I'm not going to watch any TV on weekends, and I'm going to eat better. And I had this long list of things that I would offer up to the altar, right? That I'm going to sacrifice. And the voice kept saying, no, not what I'm looking for. What are you going to sacrifice, Scott? So to fast forward for the listeners, the answer I came up with is, oh, I know what you're looking for. I'm going to sacrifice myself. Well, what does that look like? Well, what that looks like is that I'm going to bend the knee to the things that I have to do to allow me to do an Ironman, which means I'm going to have to, it's not about material things. I'm going to have to sacrifice my body. I'm going to have to sacrifice sleep. I'm going to have to sacrifice pain. I'm going to have to sacrifice discomfort. I'm going to have to run in the rain, run in the cold. If I'm bleeding, I'm going to have to run in the bleed. That's what I'm going to have to do. That's what I'm willing to do in order to cross the Ironman finish line. Okay. Now, going through that, that was really the ultimate evolution of me learning over time and effort and running in the dark and running at night, running in the cold, running in the heat, just all these different events. It was really during my Ironman training where I settled on the phrase, I see now, the more of myself I sacrifice, the more of myself I find. That's
Amazing.
where it came from.
I've got to ask you though, I want you to continue, but I want to bring in, I can identify with what made you not want to tell your family and you started training and doing it without telling? What was that about?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's
I like
yeah,
that. That would be something I would do. I'm just,
yeah. No, it's actually an important question. Okay, it's an important question. Now, I'm going to limit this to my family, but the answer is broader than that. The first thing is, and there were a series of reasons, but the very first reason that I didn't tell them is because I'd already kind of semi-answered the question, what you're willing to sacrifice, right? And I said to myself, I will not sacrifice my family in my relationship. So I did, that was the one thing that I said, I will not sacrifice my family in my relationship. And I knew that when I said I was going to do an Ironman, they were going to think I was crazy, that unattainable. You've lost your mind. And I didn't want to hear it because when I say I made up my mind, I will be doing an Ironman race, that was the end of the discussion. There was no debate. There will be this is a cut your leg off into story. So I didn't want to hear it. That was number one. Now, let me give you a couple of subtitles. I wanted to prove to myself in the early days that this wasn't some stupid game mental game I was playing with myself. And I just wanted to know, Scott, are you going to stay disciplined on this? Here's a word that I use around my family is broken promises. You've got a lot of broken promises in your life, Scott. Things that you said you're going to do that you never did. You talked about it. Talked a great game, brother. Didn't do it. So they're broken promises. So what are you going to do? I always wanted to do an Ironman. Okay. Since they first came out, we saw them on television when we were kids. Thought about it all the time. But now it's different. Now I'm going to do it. So I wanted to know for at least days and weeks that I wasn't going to break the promises. You know what I mean? So that was an inward looking thing, not an outward, right? So I don't want to take up the whole podcast telling you, but those were the two big ones. Is I wanted to know I wasn't going to break my promise to myself, and I didn't want to tell my family. And then one night, on a Friday night, I'll never forget, sitting at the dinner table. I was nervous as a cat, sitting there eating. It was quiet. My daughter, my son, my wife were there, you know. And then they always did this. They would ask me questions. Why are you working out so much?
love that.
What's going on? Are you okay? Are you
They
mad?
sense something?
Oh, of course they did.
Yeah. And you,
The temperature changed in the room, Nick. And then they would say, hey, Dad, it's Saturday. Can we go play golf on Saturday? You know what? We can, but I got to get my bike in first. What? You're working out 6 days a week. What do you mean? You just went to the gym this morning at 5 o'clock and had a strength workout, and you're going to the pool after work to swim 2,000 yards? What? Yeah, don't worry about it. I want to get back in shape. Now, they were on to me. That Friday night, they brought it up. You know, it was like a unannounced family meeting, and they brought it up. And that's when I just said, I'm doing an Ironman. I mean, everybody stopped eating. My wife looked at me cross-eyed, you know, and I said, listen, y'all need to take a deep breath. I've already paid the money. This is happening.
was she worried for you?
Yeah,
I,
for sure.
I'm just,
Yeah. Yeah, no, she was. It's okay to ask. You can ask anything. She was, and it was Ironman Arizona, and the swim was in Tempe Town Lake, and beautiful place. And when I crossed the finish line, the first person I saw was my daughter. My son couldn't make it. My wife was there. My daughter was there. Crossed the finish line, you know, sweaty hugs and kisses. You know, after that, it was my wife said, no, you can never do another one, you know. And all I said was, we'll see.
good for you.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll live to talk another day is what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, of course, at the moment, I had at that immediate moment. Matter of fact, all I could say after I finished crossed the finish line was, my knee really hurts, but I'm so happy. That's all I could say. And, but anyway, we got off track there, but I'll just, you asked the question.
No,
so
that's not off track. That's
okay.
I want to ask you, the title, Wake Up to Die Again,
Yeah.
suggests that for you, transformation isn't a single event,
Right.
it's a cycle. So I'm curious, when you're in the middle of one of those deaths, how do you know which part of yourself are worth carrying forward and which ones have just outlived their usefulness? Because I imagine some of those identities, like soldier, inventor, executive, Iron Man, they don't go quietly.
No.
So I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So your question is on the dark side, right?
Well,
Is
let's get into it.
yeah, yeah. No. That's actually I prefer to talk about that. To be
Well,
honest with
everyone
you.
has a dark side. Now,
Yeah.
it's how you use it, when
Yep.
you use it, and to the level of intensity to whatever appropriate means. If you go overboard, you have to, it's an on or an off sometimes. I don't mean to.
No, and honestly, again, transparently, I actually prefer to talk about this because that's where people are right now. I don't give a crap about the success. I don't care. What I want to talk about, and thank you for asking the question, is tell me who you are at 2 o'clock in the morning. You want to get
Yeah.
me fired up? Start telling me about 2 o'clock
Because
in the morning.
you're the finished product right now. You've had a lot of products and they're completed. And you're a new product. I'm a new product right now
That's
after
correct.
30 plus. And
That's
this
correct.
is, by the way, when I did this podcast, I didn't tell my family until I already did it. And it was already happening. And I already had guests already on. And I already bought cameras and everything was, because for me, it was just, it's just, I slipped right into it. I asked questions in the office. Now I'm asking questions online. So I've got that. But we're talking about the emotion attached to where you live and die.
Yes. Oh, no, 100%. So I do have to say this again to put this in context, okay? Looking back at my life, in part, the book talks about these series of seasons, these waves of wake up to die again moments. It's a 24 chapter book, and each of the chapters could have their own podcast, and I'm not joking. And this story about the $3 million, just to put some context to this, Nick, is early in the book. The water gets a lot deeper after the $3 million. But since we talked about that, when, and I should say after the event, all the things that one would expect happened immediately thereafter of the anger, the rage, burn the earth down. All of those things happened. I exercised enormous, almost militaristic restraint during that period of time. And in that restraint, this was the first time in my life where the events were so harmful mentally and psychologically that I did not directly answer the following question. I intuitively answered it, which is, what are you going to protect? And at all cost, and I emphasize the word all, at all cost, I was going to protect my wife, my 2.5-year-old son, and my pregnant wife, my 2.5-year-old son, was what I was going to protect. What did that mean? That meant I was going to show up and be a dad. We were going to wrestle on the floor. We were going to build tents. We were going to swim. Whatever we could afford to do, I was going to tell my wife every time we hung up the phone before we hung up, I love you. Every night before we went to bed, I love you. Every time we departed from each other, I love you. That was the one and only thing that I could hold on to when all of that drama, if I may, hit. And why did I go there first? It's because I do really believe that love heals all things. I really believe that. And I believe it because I experienced it. And I experienced it because of the great family that I was raised in, the great grandparents that I had. But where I really felt it was the unconditional love that my wife gave me and my son gave me. So, yeah, we had bad days. There were bad days, not weeks, not months. And so when you ask, where did I go? That's what I turned. First of all, that's what I turned to. Now, what did I have to discard? Believe it or not, the things I had to discard were not things that I could show you. I can't show you about how do you discard the anger from an event like that happening, because you carry that. And eventually, I can answer that question, how I discarded it. But guess what? Anger and rage always leave scars. And I say two things about scars. One, don't ever hide your scars. I did for a long time, but don't hide them, because scars are the very thing that are evidence of what came to kill you, but it failed. So you should be proud of your scars. As a matter of fact, if I could show you my cell phone, there's a lion head on the front of it. He has a scar right over his nose. And I look at that all the time as a reminder. But I retreated to the family where I received that unconditional love, and I rallied around that. And that's what got me up in the mornings. That's what, maybe I couldn't go to sleep, but anyway, that's what I did there. And then as time went by, yes, I had to work through, I had to process the anger, but I didn't do that at the expense of my wife and my son. I separated those. There was a firewall there. And yes, I internalized all that garbage. And yes, I carried that crap around. And yes, it would leak out from time to time. Sure, it did. I love talking about this, and I love talking about it because I guarantee you there is someone listening right now that is carrying a weight with them And they don't understand that you cannot get to the other side of yourself until you let that weight go. It's not going to fit through the keyhole, man.
That's going to bring me to my next question because I was waiting for you to go in that direction. Most people who've been through what you've been through spend a lifetime making peace with it by making it smaller, ignoring it, avoiding it, turning it into a lesson, a chapter, a punchline about resilience. But you haven't done that. You've kept the tension alive in the telling, and that takes a particular kind of courage that most people don't talk about. The courage to stay in the contradiction. And here's the question. Here's what I find myself thinking about as I listen to you. The very things that kept you alive over there, the vigilance, the thresholds for risk, the ability to compartmentalize and keep moving, those aren't just skills. They become someone's identity. And at some point, you had to come home and live inside a version of yourself that was built for a world that no longer existed. What was the first moment you realized that what you had been keeping alive was now costing you something?
Yeah. Yeah. What a great question. So I don't, again, it would be unfair for me to say I know the exact first moment. Doesn't work out that nicely. It was a beautiful red bow on it. But I do know the explanation that was the full transformation for me. So I'll describe it that way. Is that fair?
Of course. As you know, I'm looking at the moment of cognitive and emotional realization,
Yeah.
awareness.
No, again, I don't remember the day, but I remember one of the questions we all go through when something happens to us is the why me syndrome. All right. And adjacent to the why me on the parallel path, as I like to say, is the doesn't happen to Tommy, doesn't happen to Becky. They have everything. What happened to me? What did I do wrong? And I filleted all of that wide open on myself. And the why transformed eventually into tell me one more time what happened again. Walk me through how we got here. Let's just leave why alone for a second. Scott, let's do a little forensic analysis of what did you say? Who did you say it to? When did you say it? Where were you at? Why did you feel that way? What did you believe? I turned around to that noise in my head and I said, you and I are about to become best friends, brother. And I went through that mess again more than once because I wanted to know. And I didn't want to know it from my dad or my mom or my neighbor, or my brother or my sister. I didn't want to know it from it. That's not what I want. I want to know inside me, right? I wanted to answer that question. So I needed to tell you that to put the rest in context because in time, the answer became, oh my gosh, the way I received this idea, this invention, this thought that was placed in my head, I was supposed to have stewardship over it, not ownership. So in other words, I tried to reach into a bucket of water and grab a handful because I wanted it myself. I wanted control. Got to keep that hand open. You can move water with hand. You can't grab it. So that was the first realization is that I believed this asset, this thought, this invention, I owned it. And the real truth was I didn't. I was given stewardship over it. And that little prick in the balloon, and the water started coming out, the trail becoming a little bit clearer. I went to the next thing, which was if I didn't have ownership and I was supposed to be a good steward over it, did that mean I did something wrong? Not necessarily. Because when you're given stewardship over something, it may be taken away from you for all the good reasons. You just don't know. And it's less about why anymore because when you have a stewardship over something, it's really not about how it came to you and how it went by because when you're given stewardship and not ownership, it can come and go as it pleases from whomever gave it to you. Okay? And I really had great peace with that because then it led to another thing. Another other thing, just to come full circle on this, was from ownership to stewardship. It led to the next two, which is I was practicing addition in my life. I was trying to add all these things under my control. And I realized stewardship is more about subtraction than it is addition. And so the way I would explain that is it wasn't about more. It wasn't about more assets, more investments, more material possessions, more this is about me, more look at my invention, more get a boat, whatever, fill in whatever black hole light can't escape the thing that you want to do. Okay. Is that I look back at myself and I said, do you need all of those things? If you're steward over something and own things, do you need all of that stuff to feel whole? Is that what you need? Is that the deficit inside you that you need all of those things? And without going off into a tangent, I answered that question as no, I don't actually need any of them. I need none of them anymore. And that ties back into where we started, which is there is no possession I need, no distance I need to travel, no vacation I need, no reward that I need to find what it is I'm missing and I'm looking for. It exists right where I'm standing, right where I'm sitting. It's me. It's inside me. And so that's a giant circle that comes back to that pivot point moment of how I wrestled all of that to the ground. And I will tell you, at the end of that rainbow, if I could call it that,
Hmm.
I had the most extraordinary, and even carry it with me today, peace and joy in my life that I didn't have to own it or control it. And that was a gift that ultimately, and I talk about this in my book, Wake Up to Die Again. It was a gift to myself figuring that out, because with that peace and joy, all of my relationships, especially with my wife and my son, and then by that time, my daughter, became a gold standard because I had that internal alignment now. And none of that stuff was important. What was important was me circling around them and making sure they're taken care of. That was the gift. And of course, that sprinkled out to neighbors and friends and colleagues. And, your behavior changes.
How did your relationships change as you began to let go of the old identity structures that you once held?
Yeah, I didn't. So I'm going to go back to a statement that I made that there were this again. I didn't completely again destroy this guy, if you will. But I certainly went a long ways into learning that I'm enough for myself. That's a key phrase there, especially to the listeners. Are you enough for yourself? And the way that plays out with relationships, this is how it would play out for me. I would be talking to someone that I believed through physical representation, suits, cars, boats, houses, vacations, the way they talked. They had something that I didn't. And we would be in conversations, just anybody be in a conversation. I'd be telling me about something that they did. And something inside me would be compelled, is the word, compelled to play the comparison game that I did that too, because I wanted them to know that I did that. And that was again before. It was hell, there were times I just made up stuff so that in my mind, that person would know that I'm important too. And the way my relationships changed, and this is especially true today, is I absolutely didn't care anymore because I was enough for me. What a wonderful place. I didn't mean to rhyme, but what a wonderful place to be, right? When I can listen to someone tell me about all the wonderful things about their life that may or may not be true, but it doesn't move me emotionally anymore because that's you. That's your journey. That's your road. And if it's true, I'm really happy for you, but I don't care. What I care about is when I wake up in the morning and that my wife's taken care of and my son's taken care of and my daughter's taken care of and they still call us mom and dad. And the same thing I said before we hang up the phone with each other, I say, I love you. Before we depart for work in the morning, we say, I love you, right? That's what's important to me. And and when I wake up in the morning and my health is still here, that's what I care about, right? Or when I'm walking down the street, my neighbor sees me and he says, can I borrow the trailer? I say, you're more than welcome to it. That makes me happy, right? Or when I have a little, I haven't mentioned this before, but I came up with this idea. I actually talk about this a little bit in the book, but came with this idea that, and I'm not the first person to do this, but my wife and I will take $100 bills and we'll put them in a number 10 envelope and we put a little note in there to people and we secretly give it to them and we leave so that they don't know who got it. Right. I've been caught once or twice, but anyway, we just do that and I'll never know. I will never know if they smiled, if how thankful they were. I'll never know. And I don't want to know. I don't want the left hand to know what the right hand's doing because that's for all the wrong reasons. And so that's how my relationships have changed. Just to give you some examples, I could give you 1,000, but it's hugely different. I'm thankful to be able to help other people and not necessarily coach them. But anyway, those are some things that changed. And again, it wasn't all perfect by any means, and it sounds all pretty, but it's definitely a journey and it's definitely something that you have to continue to work on.
You're listening to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here. You can find Pivot Point Strategy for Change on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like a deeper dive into the work we explore on the show, I invite you to visit my Substack page where I share in-depth articles and reflections. When you describe inner freedom that comes from realizing no possession, no achievement, no destination can fill what's actually empty inside, How do you stay honest about that? How do you avoid it becoming just another identity?
Man, that is hard, 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 hard work. And I've had to make some really ugly decisions. And this is a story. I'm going to tell you the brief side of it. This is a story that's in my book. And there was a period of time where my daughter was driving a car and I was driving a car. We were both rear-ended in a very near period of time. It totaled the cars. And one of the vehicles I was driving, no frills vehicle, it was actually my daughter's car. She had mine and I had hers, but no frills. And we ended up getting a $15,000 insurance check. The kids, the wife, my kids were excited about, man, dad can finally get what dad wants. He's always wanted that 5 Series BMW and he loves the Tahoe because they could not see me driving the vehicle I was driving. They used to always say, why don't you get something? This isn't you. And I'd go, I don't care. I do not care. This is for me. Not, you know what I mean? I just don't care. So I'm going to answer your question. You want to say this and you want to live it. There's two different things. So here's the living it. I wanted to buy a used car. So I went up to a CarMax, found this almost brand new, all black LTZ Chevy Tahoe. I just loved them. Didn't even want to drive it. Sat in it, had every bell and whistle on it, and said, oh my God, this is it. I wasn't there 15 minutes, hour and a half drive to get up there. We're walking back to the car, two rows over past the BMW 5 Series, all the bells and whistles. Took it out for a drive. Oh my gosh, I got to make a decision now. So I told the guy, I said, listen, I'm going to think about this and I'll call you tomorrow. I'll tell you which one I want. And I'll come back and get it. On the hour and a half, around 15-minute drive home. By the way, that was my high when I told him that. That was my high point. Hour and 15-minute drive home. I began questioning myself. Why do you need that? Why did you feel that way? What was it about the BMW that was so, why is this Tahoe so important? Let's talk about it, Scott. And I got pissed off. I got pissed off because why can't you just shut up and let me buy a car? Why do we have to have this conversation? But a voice wouldn't go away. No, tell me one more time, Scott. What is it about the BMW that makes that place inside you feel so good?
The inner dialogue you were having with yourself.
Oh, yeah. Dialogue. So by the time, hour and 15 minutes later, my wife, we're almost home. She shuts the laptop and finally turns to me and says, what the hell's going on over there? She could see me fidgeting and I told her, I said, I can't buy the car. She said, what happened in an hour and 15 minutes? What are you talking? I said, I don't want to explain it to you. I said, I just can't do it. So I ended up having to tell her. I said, I can't do it. Listen, I go to the grocery store. I go to work. I go to the airport. We go to church. That's where we go. And so she said, what does that have to do with anything? Well, what I didn't want to tell her was, I told her that. I didn't want to tell her was, you know what, honey? I don't want to buy either one of those cars because there's something inside me that has to have that for my identity and for my image. And I hate that about myself. And I don't want that. And I don't know how to fix it. And so in order to fix it, I'm not going to do it. I just couldn't bring myself to tell her that. And so I just told her, little white lie, as they say, right? I just don't want it. And so a few days later, I find a all black, Volkswagen Passat with, the nice 6-cylinder engine and all the bells and whistles, and drove up and saw it. And I was pissed off driving up there. I was pissed off looking at it. And the guy came out and he said, what do you want to do? I said, I'll take this one. And he said, sir, you haven't even driven it. And I said, I don't want to drive it. Just do the paperwork and I'll sit here. And I was sulking, pissed off kindergartner, but by God, I was going to do it. And I was going to punish or crucify. I was going to cut off, bury, kill, whatever it was inside me that I just did not like that. So I bought the Volkswagen Passat and I drove home pissed off. And so now fast forward, this is, again, quite frankly, it's a long time ago. I still have my Volkswagen Passat and I love it. Right. But I want to go back to a moment in time to conclude this, which is a few years ago in the car, my wife, my son, my daughter, joking around, Dad, I don't know how we even got on the conversation, but Dad, when are you going to get rid of this Volkswagen Passat and get something this whole conversation came up again. And I just smiled and I said, you know what? You haven't really lived until you drive a Volkswagen Passat. And they, of course, the brakes, they just looked at me, what are you talking about? They had no idea what I was talking about. And they learned it when they read that section of the book, right? Because this is in the book. But that's the answer. That's a hardcore story about if you want to live that life, then you're going to have to find out what is it inside you that you need externally to be affirmed, and you need to go kill it, figuratively speaking.
Yeah.
And I've not only made that decision once, I made that decision twice on another big investment where I got that feeling all over again. And I said, no, we're not doing this twice. This time I know what to do, right? And so again, this is me. This is my decision. Most people would never do that, but I just don't want to have the feeling that I need other stuff to be happy because it's a lie. And I don't want to live that lie.
How do you recognize now in real time when you're starting to drift, when you're slipping back toward the patterns that drove the misalignment in the first place?
Yeah,
What is
that's
your
actually
awareness
easy
now?
now. No, that's again, no offense. That's for me,
No,
that's
good.
easy. Yeah, and the easy answer is that if I'm starting to drift, it's because I'm beginning to allow some possession to
Mm.
drive a feeling within me. Okay. And that's real easy. How about this? Scott, if you had one of those nice all carbon triathlon bikes, imagine what you could do on the race course. Real story. And when that crap started, I said, "Hey, Scott, got a little story for you. That bike you got out in the garage, that's a regular road bike that you have aero bars bolted onto it that maybe you don't fit so right. That's what your little butt's going to do 140.6 miles on, brother." And so we went through that exercise and we did an Ironman race on that bike. And then after that, when I decided to go get another bike, I didn't feel the same way anymore. It was I earned that versus I need that.
Yes.
And so that's how I know when that drift comes, I catch it quick, but the conversations aren't very long.
So is it a cognitive, emotional, or physical kind of awareness? What happens for you?
It's both.
It's both. Okay.
Yeah.
So for someone listening right now who feels that quiet sense of something is off but can't quite name it yet, what's the first honest step towards confronting it? That
Is I would encourage you to consider that feeling is that you're running from something and you need to turn around and have a seat and get intimate and have a long, maybe multi-day discussion in great forensic detail of what that's all about. And I like to encourage people to do this in journaling. That's a gift I think you give to yourself. It's really difficult to start out journaling because you feel, I don't know, it's like you feel like you're betraying yourself when you start writing down, information, but it gets easier the more you do it. And journaling is a gift you can give to yourself is just free flow thought of what is it that you're thinking. And it's amazing to go back days or months later and reread it and go, man, what a jerk, what an idiot. But sometimes you go back and read it and I go, wow, that was profound. And this is going to turn into a story that I write. I also publish articles in a newspaper once a week as a columnist. And some of these things out of my journal, I mean, I didn't write it in raw form, but some of these stories that I thought I've used for wonderful lessons and written stories about them and published them in the newspaper. So they've been gifts.
you're listening to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. If today's conversation resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It truly helps others find the show and supports the work we're doing here. Illusions and Truths. You wrote a chapter, and in it, you asked the reader, what lie have you been defending so long that it began to feel like the truth? Now, I want to come back to that question because I think that chapter, it sounds like it's the psychological center of everything that you've written, even if it doesn't announce itself that way. But when I heard it, it stopped me, not because the question is surprising, but because of what it actually requires to answer it honestly. It's relatively easy to name a lie in retrospect, once it already cost you something. What's much harder is locating the moment when you were still inside it, still organizing your life around it and something you had already begun to know. So that gap between the lie still running and the awareness starting to surface is where I think your most important material lives. So I want to ask you the question directly. What was your lie and when did you first become aware of it? Not just cognitively, emotionally, because those two awarenesses rarely arrive together. Most people can tell you when they've figured it out intellectually, when the logic stopped holding, when the story they'd been telling didn't quite close anymore. But the
Yeah.
emotional recognition tends to come earlier and quieter, and it lives in the body before it ever reaches language. And I'm curious which one hit you first and what it cost you to let the gap between them go on as long as they did.
Yeah. So it's not lie for me. It's plural. It's lie. I don't subscribe to the belief that necessarily it's a singular lie. It's a compounding effect. It's plural. It's a plurality lies, right? So the easy one, I've already danced around this a little bit, is the lies about being more, talking to people, expressing and sharing that I am more than I know that I am. We all do this. It's not embellishing, it's lying. It's trying to convince other people that you are something that you're not. We spend, my God, go to Instagram, go to social media. It's a fraud. We're trying to convince people that we are something that we are absolutely not, and we know it. I was in the party before social media. It was a lot harder then. Okay. You had to work harder at it. So that was that's something you constantly have to be mindful of. Hell, I catch myself even now being mindful of it. For some reason, that garbage wells up and you feel like you have to one up somebody. You just have to catch yourself and go, where did that come from? You know? So that's honestly, it's the short answer. It wasn't lie, it was lies, and it was trying to convince other people that I was something I was not. And I became very good at it.
No, well said. I want to ask you this because the military teaches compartmentalization as a survival skill. And it works because it keeps people alive, it keeps missions on track, it keeps units functioning. When did compartmentalization stop being a tool and start becoming a liability?
Yeah, that actually started right after the military. I share with people the three main words that the military taught me, and that was make it happen. To this day, I've never served under in a such dense period of time like I did in the military, the great leadership that I had in the military. From the moment I arrived at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, until I left the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley, Kansas, outstanding leadership. And they all, whether they said it or not, believed, make it happen. And I freaking excelled in that.
Believe
And I was
that.
rewarded for that. But then when I left and showed up in college as a freshman, having come back just weeks before from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, and I'm sitting in my first class on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. It was military history. And the professor proceeded to espouse his wonderful beliefs of how much he didn't like the military, we shouldn't be in the desert and all this stuff. And he and I got to know each other real quick at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday. I didn't care. But the military skill of make it happen does not translate to the civilian life, doesn't. It is a valuable skill to have in civilian life. It does not translate into civilian life. Big difference. And so that's where, going back to using that example of the military, my 4 years in college were very difficult. And by the way, I didn't just leave I was active duty the first 4 years, but then I stayed in the National Guard for 4 years. So 8 years total. So it wasn't like that was still a part of me when I would go to my weekend drills and my 2-week summer camp. And, I loved that. So it was still a part of me. So that continued to feed the engine. And so this compartmentalization, this idea of compartmentalizing thing was a train wreck for me because the world, no, we're not going to compartmentalize things, Scott. You've got to be this and you got to be that. You got to blend this over here. And you got to look this way and you need to dress this way. And by the way, that person said this about you. That's important. You should know that. And you need to act this way. So that person thinks this. And it all just blended together. And here I am trying to compartmentalize, make it happen. And the world had a whole different plan. Yeah, that did not mix well.
Yeah, there's a real difference between ignoring pain to complete a mission and ignoring pain as a way of life. And at what point did those two things blur for you? And how long before you recognized that they had?
Years. Yeah. Even after the health passport, way after that, it took years. And matter of fact, it took experiencing an enormous amount of pain. And I can almost tell you it's about 10 years ago. I'd have to think about it. But this resulted actually in one of the chapters in my book. And the title of the chapter, I'm glad you asked this. The title of the chapter is The Gifts Are in the Pain. So the very pain that you're avoiding, you're excluding yourself from getting the very gift that you need. And if we go back to the earlier discussion about sitting down with myself and saying, I'm sick of asking the question why it happened. Let's start talking about you. And that was a painful conversation for a long time because I had to come up with an answer of what do you, by the way, we know what the truth is. Stop lying to yourself. I got sick of lying to myself, by the way, right? And it's a wonderful place to be when you're sick of your lying to yourself. But when you're sick of lying for yourself, what is this saying? I'm sick of being sick, right?
Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah, there you go. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's a wonderful place to be because now we can finally get some freaking work done. And guess what? That little voice you just heard there was make it happen, right? And so anyway, it was years later, but that's a chapter in the book, and it's The Gifts Are in the Pain. I mentioned this earlier in the conversation. You tell me what you're willing to sacrifice, and I'll tell you where you're going.
Now, I want to be careful when I ask this question.
Don't
think
be
it
careful.
matters. No, do you believe the version of you that crossed Ironman finish lines and built companies could have accomplished those things if you had been the man you are today, a man with greater emotional awareness, less willing to ignore the signs of stress and trauma or pain? And what does your honest answer to that tell us about the cost of that earlier version of yourself?
That's an easy answer. No. And it's not because I've mastered everything. It's because even the version I am today if I could go back and do some of those things, I would make new mistakes, right? We don't know. Well, we don't know. We don't know. But that's just too easy of an answer is that it doesn't matter how much you think you've mastered. You don't be walking around with that chip on your shoulder because the world will find a way to knock it off. And so I honestly do my best to remain humble and thankful and grateful because I know there is another lightning strike out there. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. I say in my book, you can't outrun yourself. So no matter how much, Nick, you've improved and I've improved where we've arrived today, it's just a journey, man. This is the what is it called? The endless game, man.
Yeah.
It's the
Well
endless
said.
game. So I don't look at it that way. And I don't think the answer is no. And that's okay. Again, I don't need to do that. I don't have to prove that myself. By the way, doing an Ironman race now, it isn't about proving anything anymore. It's not proving I can do it. I'm past that. You know what inspires me to do Ironman races today? Ready for this? You're not going to be surprised by the answer. It's real simple because the more I sacrifice myself, the more self I find. And I like finding myself. And so does my family, right? One last thing on that topic. When I did my first Ironman race, I had to walk the last, I forgot what it was, 8 or 9 miles. My knee was exploding. It was excruciating. And when I turned the corner, 400 yards in front of me, the lights and the music and the crowd, and, I remember telling myself, you're going to have to stop hurting for just a minute because by God, I'm going to run. And that last 400 yards, I ran. Well, how about this? I jogged slowly. And when I crossed the finish line, because people used to always ask me, what are you going to say how are you going to feel when you cross? Are you going to cry? Yeah, I don't know. And when I crossed the finish line, it was nothing like what I thought it was going to be. All I could say to my daughter over and over again, I'll never forget, it gives me chill bumps saying it. I am so thankful. And my knee really hurts. And we'd go a few more steps. And as I was limping, she was holding my hand. Are you okay, Dad? I am so thankful, but my knee really hurts. And man, isn't that true? Should that be true of life? I'm so thankful, but some things in life really hurt.
So for the men listening right now who identify with everything about the mission first mindset, the training, the discipline, the relentless forward motion, and who have never once asked themselves what they might be carrying underneath all of it, where does that conversation even begin?
Yeah. Again, it goes back, and I want to be redundant here. It goes back. You're going to have that conversation with yourself. By the way, is it genuinely, do people need to have professional counselors? Of course they do. If there's extraordinary trauma, should you see someone that's skilled? And absolutely. Okay. But then go do it. Okay. But if you don't need to go see someone for trauma therapy or PTSD, or if it's not that, then you need to turn around and look at yourself. I'm going to go over this again, and you need to get inside this, and that's what you need to fix. It's a heart problem. It's a mind problem. It's an internal shadow voice problem. That's what you need to kill, right? You need to lock that in the cage. It's never going to go away, but you ultimately will have control if you're willing to do the work. And for me, it wasn't just go run an Ironman race, or no, it was all those things we've talked about and many, many more, 24 chapters in a book that I talk about, of being willing to look at it, look at what it is, and wrestle with that. And if we all have I'm going to say this, we all have that voice in our head, and one of them has to win. And I've made choices where I refuse to allow that voice to win. It's going to win some battles. It's okay. It's going to win some battles. You're not winning the war.
Well
So
said.
the answer is, where do you start? Is you start with yourself. And don't go running around telling people you're doing all this. Keep your mouth shut. Have that conversation. Sign up for the race with yourself and don't tell anybody. That would be my encouragement for others to consider if you're struggling with this. And I think many people are.
You said your military background was ingrained with one direction, forward. But there's a generation of men right now in active service in law enforcement and fire departments who are doing exactly what they're trained to do, compartmentalizing, suppressing, pushing through, and genuinely believing that letting the emotion in would compromise their effectiveness. What do you say to that man? Not the man on the other side of it like you, but the man still in it who needs that armor to function.
Yeah, no, I actually understand that. And
Yeah.
I would not deviate from that belief because there are bad things that have to be done.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fact. But I also will say, I reciprocate that on myself, is that it's not just an outward shell. There are bad things that you're going to have to do to yourself to get over yourself. So that streak runs both ways. That's my answer. The streak runs both ways. Okay. It's not one way. I can do this to other people, but I can't do it to myself. I'm sorry. And I'm just not going to agree with that. So what I would say to I guess the men and women, by the first way, thank you for what you do. All right. And yes, you are going to have to go into harm's way. And yes, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to ever talk about. And maybe you won't talk about for a long time, right? And maybe you don't need to ever talk about. But what I would say to you is you're going to have to reconcile that with yourself. If it's privately, then that's what you need to do. If you need to get counseling, if you need to go see somebody, that's what you need to do. But I always encourage people to start with yourself. And you start by telling yourself the truth. And the truth's okay. And I will say this too. We haven't talked about this, but one of the gifts that you get for telling yourself the truth and your willingness to go back through that crap again mentally, one of the big gifts is it's no longer has power over you once you identify.
Well said. You stopped writing for about 6 months and you threw yourself back into training.
Yeah.
And I know your kids thought you were done, even after you told them that you were taking a break. I want to offer you something before I ask you about it, because I think what happened in that time is worth naming, honestly. It doesn't read to me as avoidance. It reads like a necessary withdrawal, stepping back from the edge of something real so you could eventually meet it with more capacity. And in my approach to work, in the Gestalt therapy approach, the writing you had been doing, it had taken you as far as your awareness could go in that moment. The material was alive, but not yet fully metabolized. So instead of forcing contact, you turned toward training, an environment your system already knew how to inhabit, that gave you different ground to stand on while deeper process kept moving underneath. That's not escape. That's self-regulation in the awareness cycle. In the awareness cycle, withdrawal isn't a failure. It's one of engagement. It's part of the cycle itself. So it creates the space for something unresolved to keep organizing without pressure. And what strikes me is that you didn't shut it down permanently. You stepped away in order to come back more honestly. And when you returned, you weren't just resuming, you were meeting the material from a different level of clarity. So
Yeah.
if I were putting language to it, you weren't avoiding the process, you were protecting it. So, but I want to ask you directly, because you were inside it and I
Yeah.
wasn't. So looking back at those 6 months roughly right now, what was the training actually doing for you? Was it giving you clarity, or was some part of it still a way of not having to sit with what the book was asking of you?
Yeah. I love how you ended that. The book, when I started the book, I made a promise to myself. And remember, we talked about broken promises earlier in the podcast. And the promise I made to myself is that I was going to be authentic, I was going to be transparent, and I was going to sacrifice myself in the book, right? If I did those three things, then there would be no doubt that when my readers read the book, they would know that they didn't get some cotton candy 7 steps to get everything you want garbage. And they would be able to see their life inside my life, different story, different circumstances. That was a requirement that I made. And that's why it took me so long to even start writing the book later in my life, because the book's been ready for a long time, but I wasn't. So in that process, it was very difficult for me organizationally, structurally. I had a lot of stories. I had content flowing out of my brain, but I couldn't put the story arc together. And I'm sorry to have to say this, it's not a prideful thing, but I just fell in love with the story arc to my 24 chapters, but not in the beginning. In the beginning, it was going through a mental swamp and, a lack of confidence in some of the stories of, what's the point? Where are we going? Who cares? What is it? What's the meaning? By the way, there was that voice all along in the early parts of the book. Hey, Scott, nobody cares about what you're writing about. Hey, Scott, who's going to care? And that was what I was wrestling with in all of that. And it wasn't imposter syndrome, wasn't any of that stuff. It was just my self-identity, because I'm sacrificing myself on these pages. I'm being vulnerable. And I was fighting with all that. And then like you said, I just said, I've got to stop this for a minute. And I had plenty of stories to write, but I just said, listen, you need to do what you got to go back and sacrifice something. And now we got to answer that question. What are you willing to sacrifice now? Are you willing to step away from the book? And it wasn't, I'm going to step away for 6 months. It's just, are you willing to step away from the book and leave it alone, catch your breath, go do some training, practice your I'm willing to sacrifice myself stuff, go do all that, throw yourself into swim more, whatever, mow the yard, whatever you need to do, and just see where it goes. I said, yeah, I think I need to do that.
See, that's why when you said that to me in an earlier conversation, I kind of understood what you were doing, when you started to tell me, I knew what you needed. And maybe I can identify with that. Many people can when they need to step away and then return, because you didn't abandon it, but the
No,
emotions are overwhelming. and you needed some more clarity. I think you needed your subconscious mind to really integrate it all together. I think you would return back to your strength, which is your training. Other people might do it with music or art or performing in order to distance themselves before they go back to the storytelling, because you had to refine yourself. You're right there and you went back to your strength. I think that is amazing. And I am so glad you persisted and it worked for you and you got this done, because
Yeah.
that's an important piece there that the world needed to hear, I strongly believe.
Yeah.
And I want
And
to
I
tell
think
you that.
it's fair. I should share as well, because I mean, if I was listening to this right now, I would say, okay, well, what caused you to come back? Did you have a great workout one day and the sun come up? And, no. I answered this really important question that I was wrestling with. That question was, who's going to give a crap about what you wrote? Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And then one day I said to myself, wait a minute, I care. What the hell are we talking about here?
Yeah. But you needed to go through your journey, which is fine.
Yeah, it was. And so once I began to go, yeah, I care. And as a matter of fact, not only do I care, my wife cares, and my son's going to care, my daughter's going to care, my sister's going to care. And hey, you know what? I talked to my neighbor about this, and
Yes.
and so it's like that trigger and this. Okay, so then I come back and I start writing, and I think I told you this. I finished the last. First of all, when I came back, I knew the last chapter.
Yeah.
I could have written the last chapter when I came back, but I didn't. I wrote. I mean, there's this
In
lot
sequence,
of information. I knew every chapter. I knew every story. You can't see it, but over my shoulder, there's a dry board. I was voraciously writing on the dry board in big circles of this idea, this concept linked to this, and it leads to that, and blah, blah, gets it. I knew. And I sat in my office sometimes on weekends from 5 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, other than restrooms, going to the restroom and eating food. I sat in my office. I was working 40-hour weeks on the weekend. And you know what? I was thankful and I was so happy. But I'm just telling you that the last 12 chapters of my book, that long. That was a 6-month. And what did I think about over 6 months? Man, you're losing time, you're losing ground. All that garbage.
Well, you said the first half of the book took about a year to write, and the second half came quickly, almost easily. But once you finally knew how it ended, what had to happen inside you before that second half could come? What do you think?
Yeah, well, no, I know the answer to that is I had to re-answer the question because I think I told you earlier, some of the stuff that you and I've been talking about are in the first 7 chapters of the book. There's much deeper blue water after chapter 12. And we'll probably have to come back and do a podcast on the second half of the book. But I think subconsciously that I needed to prepare myself for something that I had reconciled. But even though things are reconciled, when you reach back in history and start pushing and poking on things, matter of fact, you just reminded me of something. I'm gonna butcher the saying. People can Google it and find it for themselves. But I put this in my book. This was another thing I found during the 6 months. Stephen King, he said, again, I'm going to butcher this. I apologize. But here's the net of it. Anybody can write a story, but the people that write great stories remember all the pain and can tell you about it.
That's nice.
Oh my God, the chill bumps that when I read that, I was like, I needed that from Stephen King. That was one of those subconscious things. I think I needed to prepare myself to understand what I needed to do in the last 6 chapters. So that was another, I'd forgotten about that. But yeah, that happened during that 6 months that really subconsciously, I think I needed to get it done.
I think it helped you get it done. That's what I think. Now, when you look back, what would you want your younger self to know, just generally?
You're going to make it. That's it. You're going to make it. Because there were many times in my life where I said, this is the end. It's not. And to your listeners, I want you to hear that, but you got to do some work. You're going to make it, but you need to do some work.
Well said. Scott, what stays with me after a conversation like this is something that almost sounds too simple to matter, but it's not simple at all. The work isn't out there. It's not in the next strategy, the next company, or the next version of the life you're building. It's in the confrontation with who you've been becoming while you were busy building all of it. And as I sit here thinking about your story, I realize it's not really about loss, even though there was real loss. It's not really about reinvention, even though everything changed. It's about what becomes possible when you stop negotiating with the parts of yourself you've been carrying in silence, when you stop trying to fix everything on the outside, and finally, honestly address what's driving it. So, Scott, I want to take a moment first to say thank you for being here on Pivot Point Strategy for Change. Your story has really been an amazing one and an inspirational one for many, and I can tell you truthfully, it's going to have a big impact on listeners.
Nick, it's an honor to hear you say that, because I know you've had many, many guests on before me, and you don't say things lightly. And so thank you for honoring me with that statement. I mean, I really do appreciate that. And if this, I just want to close with saying the book, you learn this deep in the book, and I'm not spoiling it for anybody, is a long form version of what I couldn't tell my family over 1,000 Thanksgiving dinners. But in the process of telling that story for them and future generations of children born into the family I don't even know yet, alongside that, a parallel path, I know there's other Scotts out there, Nicks out there.
And that's why I'm so pleased and happy to know you got it done.
Yeah.
You're a regular guy.
Yeah.
Who's been doing regular things. You've done some amazing regular things, and let's put it in perspective here.
Yeah.
But I like speaking to regular men and women who are doing some amazing things and are driven with purpose and in a direction to share their story. And the core of where I got the idea to do this work right now and talk about people and their pivot points in their lives, it comes from speaking to others like yourself, who I would say, you've got to write that book. You've got to get out there and do that course. So you've got to share what you're doing. So it brings me so much excitement to hear the journey you've been through and be able to have that timeless book, be able to share that with others and refer to it, because you have no idea, we all have no idea, the impact that it will have on others for forever. It certainly will. Because if you think about the things you've read over time, the philosophies that you've absorbed and accepted and embraced and made it a life, and you're giving it back to your family and to beyond, that your grandkids and beyond. And that's important for, I think, others to know and share. So I want to really thank you for your true honesty and your authenticity and your willingness to be vulnerable, because you come from a place of experience. And I want to compliment you on all of that and sharing with that, because it is not easy. And that's the thing that my goal is to also encourage others to do, and to be themselves and to share their story, because you're a regular guy who did some amazing things that you might just dismiss like a regular guy does in our generation and think not much of it, but you're leaving it out there for others to learn and see and experience. And that is the gift that is amazing. It's wonderful.
And I do think of it as a gift, and I do appreciate that. And the one thing, though, I really do want the listeners to leave with, on that wonderful note that you just said, I really want them to leave with how we started this conversation. What a beautiful circle, right? Which is, the more you sacrifice of yourself, the more of yourself you're going to find. The more of yourself you're going to find. And you're going to wake up every day, and I hope you'll say, I'm so thankful, but my life really hurts. That's okay.
Scott, thank you again. And for those listening, Scott's story reminds us that sometimes the collapse isn't the end of the story. It's the only way truth can finally step forward. His journey from achievement to authenticity, from ownership to surrender, offers a mirror for anyone standing at that quiet threshold where everything looks fine but feels off. As you listen back or reflect on this conversation, consider your own lightning strikes. Those moments when something you built no longer fits who you are. What might be calling you to release control, to let something false die so something true can take its place? Because sometimes the real pivot isn't what we do next. It's in who we finally allow ourselves to become. If something in this conversation stirred something in you, I'd invite you not to push it aside. That discomfort isn't noise. It's usually a signal. So as you carry this with you, wherever you are, whatever you're building, whatever you're holding on to a little too tightly, the question I leave you with is the one Scott lives inside of every day. What are you willing to sacrifice to become who you were always meant to be. That's your pivot point. I leave you with the one question. Think about it. What is your pivot point? What's your pivot point?
Answering the question every day,